Everyone laughed at her until she became the only one who could save hundreds of lives. The morning of March 15th began like any other for Commander Alicia Freeman. She stood at Gate B-34 of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, boarding pass in hand, waiting for Flight 923 to New York. At 56 years old, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had earned every stripe on her uniform through blood, sweat, and silence. But today, she wore civilian clothes. No uniform, no visible rank, just another black woman in line. Alicia had joined the Navy at 22, one of the few black women in her officer class. For 30 years, she navigated a world designed to overlook her. She was passed over for promotion 3 times before earning each rank. She watched less qualified men rise while she waited. She endured whispered doubts and loud dismissals. Yet she persisted, specializing in crisis management and aviation operations until she became one of the highest-ranking black women in Navy history. But rank meant nothing at Gate B-34. Her boarding pass triggered a random security flag. Within seconds, a man in a crisp airline uniform approached her with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. Richard Thompson, Senior Operations Manager, was known among staff for targeting passengers he deemed difficult. His record held multiple complaints from black travelers, all conveniently dismissed. He demanded she step aside. Alicia complied calmly, presenting her military identification as additional verification. Richard glanced at it and laughed. The sound was sharp, designed to draw attention. Passengers nearby turned to watch. "Anyone can buy a fake military ID online," he announced loudly, ensuring the growing crowd could hear every word. Alicia felt heat rise in her chest but kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that reaction was what men like Richard craved. She would not give him that satisfaction. But Richard was not finished. He stepped closer, invading her space, his voice dripping with condescension. "This isn't a military ship, Admiral," he sneered, placing air quotes around her rank. "We don't need your type thinking you can skip procedures. Standing at attention won't help you here." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A white businessman nearby muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, probably lying about her rank anyway. More laughter, more eyes, more phones recording. Alicia's hands trembled slightly at her sides, but her face remained stone. She thought of her mother, a woman who cleaned houses of white families in rural Georgia, who swallowed her pride daily to put food on the table. She thought of every promotion denied, every door closed, every time she proved herself only to be asked to prove herself again. 30 years of discipline fought against 30 years of suppressed rage. She could destroy Richard Thompson with one phone call. She had connections that would end his career before sunset, but she chose silence. Not because she was weak, because she understood something Richard never would. Dignity is not proven by fighting every battle. It is proven by knowing which ones matter. When Richard finally exhausted his performance, Alicia gathered her bag with deliberate calm. She made eye contact with him and held it until he looked away first. Then she spoke 6 words, her voice steady as steel. "I'll board when you're finished." She walked past him without another glance, nodding politely to the embarrassed flight attendant at the gate. Behind her, an elderly black man shook his head sadly. A young black mother covered her daughter's ears, shielding her from witnessing another lesson in humiliation. A young flight attendant named Lisa Chen watched with visible discomfort but said nothing. Alicia found her seat in business class, row 4A, window. She buckled her seatbelt and opened a book, but the words blurred before her eyes. She read the same paragraph 5 times without absorbing a single word. Her hands still trembled. Her cheeks still burned. The humiliation played on repeat in her mind. 30 years of service, medals, commendations, a ceremony waiting for her at the Pentagon. And still, she was just another black woman causing problems. As passengers settled around her, Alicia noticed a co-pilot walking through the cabin toward the cockpit. His name tag read Ethan Riley. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with the build of a former military man. Their eyes met briefly as he passed. Something in his expression made her pause. His jaw was tight. His forehead glistened with sweat despite the cool cabin air. His eyes darted away too quickly, as if hiding something he could not name. Alicia dismissed the thought. She was being paranoid. The trauma of the morning had her seeing shadows where none existed. She closed her eyes and leaned against the window, willing herself to rest. She did not know that in less than 2 hours, the man who humiliated her would become the least of her problems. The real danger was already on board. Flight 923 lifted off smoothly at 7:23 a.m., climbing through scattered clouds into a pale blue sky. The cabin hummed with the sounds of ordinary travel. Passengers adjusting seats, flight attendant preparing beverage carts, a child asking her mother how high the plane would fly. Alicia kept her eyes closed but could not sleep. The morning replayed endlessly behind her eyelids. Richard's sneer, the laughter, the phones recording her humiliation for strangers to enjoy later. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale, each exhale. Around her, 246 other passengers settled into their routines. Marcus Williams, a 67-year-old retired postal worker, flipped through photos of his pregnant daughter on his phone. He was flying to New York to meet his first grandchild. Denise Carter, a 45-year-old corporate lawyer, reviewed notes for a case that could define her career. James and Tanya Brooks, a young couple on their honeymoon, held hands across the armrest, whispering promises of forever. None of them knew what was coming. 1 hour into the flight, the cabin lights flickered. Most passengers barely noticed, too absorbed in movies or conversations or sleep. But Alicia's eyes snapped open. 30 years of military training had taught her to recognize when something was wrong, even when she could not name it. She watched as Ethan Riley, the co-pilot, emerged from the cockpit and walked quickly down the aisle. His movements were stiff, mechanical. He checked his watch 3 times in 30 seconds. When the plane hit a patch of mild turbulence, he smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a relieved smile, a satisfied smile. Alicia's instinct screamed, but she forced herself to stay calm. She was a passenger today, not a commander. She had no authority here. Perhaps the young man was simply anxious. Perhaps she was projecting her own turmoil onto a stranger. She closed her eyes again. 17 minutes later, the plane shuddered violently. Alicia's eyes flew open as alarms blared through the cabin. Emergency lights flashed yellow. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, swinging wildly as the aircraft lurched. The plane dropped 2,000 feet in seconds, throwing unsecured items into the air. Screams erupted throughout the cabin. Passengers grabbed armrests, loved ones, anything solid. A child wailed for her mother. Marcus clutched his phone, staring at his daughter's photo as if memorizing her face. Denise fumbled for her seatbelt, hands shaking. The honeymoon couple gripped each other, tears streaming. Alicia moved with practiced precision. She secured her own oxygen mask first, then helped the elderly woman beside her. Her eyes scanned the cabin rapidly, assessing injuries, counting exits, noting crew positions. This was not turbulence. These were system failures, multiple and simultaneous. Captain Henry Shaw's voice crackled over the intercom, strained with barely concealed fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened." Alicia heard what the other passengers could not, a commander losing control. Lisa Chen, the young flight attendant who had witnessed the humiliation at the gate, rushed past Alicia's row. Tears streamed down her face. She was heading toward the cockpit, her composure shattered. Alicia reached out and caught her arm gently. "What's happening?" Lisa's voice broke. "I don't know. But Ethan, something's wrong with Ethan." That was all Alicia needed to hear. She unbuckled her seatbelt and moved toward the cockpit, her military training overriding every civilian instinct telling her to stay seated. Passengers watched her pass with desperate eyes, some reaching toward her as if she could somehow save them. She reached the cockpit door and looked through the small window. Inside, she saw Captain Shaw arguing with Ethan Riley. The captain's face was red with fear. Ethan's hand hovered near a panel of switches, his expression cold and determined. Alicia used her military identification and authority to convince Lisa to unlock the door. She stepped inside, and both men turned to face her. Captain Shaw's relief was immediate. "Thank God. Are you really military?" Ethan's face went pale. His eyes held recognition and something else, guilt. Alicia took command posture, shoulders squared, voice firm. "Report. What's happening with this aircraft?" Captain Shaw spoke rapidly. "Systems are failing everywhere. Navigation, hydraulics, fuel readings. Nothing makes sense. Nothing follows any pattern I've ever seen. Alicia turned to Ethan. The young co-pilot was sweating heavily now, his hands trembling against the control panel. She recognized that look. She had seen it in soldiers who carried secrets too heavy to bear. "You know something," she said, her voice dropping low. "Speak." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His jaw worked silently, fighting some internal battle. Then, under the weight of Alicia's unwavering gaze, he crumbled. "I did this." His voice was barely a whisper. "I sabotaged the systems." Captain Shaw erupted. "What?" Passengers in first class heard the shout. Panic intensified. But Alicia remained still, her eyes locked on Ethan, waiting for the rest. It came in fragments, each confession more devastating than the last. Ethan was drowning in debt to dangerous people. They had kidnapped his 7-year-old daughter 3 days ago. The instructions were simple. Cause a crash over rural Pennsylvania, make it look like mechanical failure, and his daughter would be released. He was never meant to survive. He had accepted death to save his child. Alicia listened without interrupting. She saw the terror in his eyes, the desperation of a father facing an impossible choice. She did not forgive him, but she understood desperation in ways few people could. When he finished, she asked only one question: "How long do we have?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Maybe 40 minutes before total system failure. Maybe less." Alicia nodded slowly. "Then you have 40 minutes to help me undo what you've done." She turned to Captain Shaw. "Focus on keeping us level. I'll handle communications with air traffic control and work with him on the systems." Before anyone could respond, Lisa burst into the cockpit again, her face white with terror. "There's a man in coach," she gasped. "He has something strapped to his chest. He's saying he has a bomb." The cockpit fell silent. Alicia felt the weight of 247 lives settle onto her shoulders. One enemy in the cockpit, one enemy in the cabin, and a plane falling apart around them all. She had trained her entire life for moments like this, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. Alicia stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds. In those seconds, her mind calculated every variable: a sabotaged aircraft losing systems, a desperate co-pilot paralyzed by guilt, an unconscious threat in the cabin, and 247 souls depending on decisions she would make in the next few minutes. 3 seconds. Then she moved. "Describe the man," she commanded Lisa, her voice cutting through the panic like a blade. Lisa stammered through the details. "Passenger 23C. Gregory Hines. White male, mid-40s, traveling alone. He had been quiet for most of the flight, muttering to himself, agitated. Then suddenly, he stood up, opened his jacket, and revealed a device strapped to his chest. Wires, a small screen, a trigger clutched in his right hand. Passengers in coach had erupted into chaos. Some tried to rush toward first class, creating dangerous crowding in the aisles. Others remained frozen in their seats, too terrified to move. Children screamed. Elderly passengers struggled to breathe. Alicia faced an impossible choice. She was needed in the cockpit to repair the sabotage systems. She was also the only person on board with training to neutralize a bomb threat. Captain Shaw could barely keep the plane stable. Ethan was useless, drowning in guilt and fear. She needed help, but who could she trust? Her mind flashed to the passengers she had observed during boarding. The elderly black man who had witnessed a humiliation at the gate. The sharp-eyed lawyer who had been reviewing case notes. Ordinary people. Untrained. Terrified. But sometimes, courage did not require training. Sometimes, it only required willingness. Alicia grabbed the intercom and spoke with calm authority. "Mr. Marcus Williams and Ms. Denise Carter, please come to the front of the aircraft immediately. This is not a request." Seconds stretched into eternity. Then Marcus appeared, moving slowly but steadily up the aisle. Behind him came Denise, her legal document abandoned, her face tight with fear but her eyes focused. Alicia wasted no time. "I need you both to help Captain Shaw keep this plane in the air." Marcus blinked. I delivered mail for 28 years. I don't know anything about flying." "You don't need to fly," Alicia replied. "You need to watch gauges and report numbers. Can you read numbers?" Marcus straightened. Yes, I can read numbers. She turned to Denise. You're a lawyer. You communicate under pressure for a living. I need you on the radio with air traffic control. Relay everything they say, word for word. No interpretation. No panic. Just words. Denise nodded, her professional composure returning. I can do that. Alicia positioned them in the cockpit, gave rapid instructions, and watched as they took their places beside the shaken Captain Shaw. Ethan was already working on the systems, his hands trembling but moving with purpose. Then Alicia turned toward the cabin, toward Gregory Hines, toward the man with the bomb. She walked slowly down the aisle, hands visible at her sides, palms open. Passengers shrank away as she passed, their eyes following her with desperate hope. She made brief eye contact with James and Tanya, the honeymoon couple, silently communicating that they should remain still. Gregory stood in the middle of the coach, surrounded by empty seats. Passengers had fled as far as possible, pressing against windows and walls. His hand gripped the trigger tightly, his knuckles white. His eyes were wild, darting from face to face, searching for threats. Alicia stopped 10 feet away, close enough to be heard, far enough to appear non-threatening. My name is Alicia, she said, her voice calm and measured. I'm not crew. I'm a passenger, just like you. Gregory's response was immediate and loud. Stay back. I'll blow us all to hell. I swear to God I will. Alicia did not flinch. I'm not moving. I just want to talk. That's all. There's nothing to talk about. Gregory's voice cracked with emotion. Nobody listens. Nobody ever listens. Alicia recognized the pain beneath the rage. This was not a man seeking destruction for its own sake. This was a man drowning in grief, desperate to be heard. Tell me about Patricia, she said softly. Gregory's entire body stiffened. His grip on the trigger loosened slightly. His eyes filled with tears. How do you know that name? I don't, Alicia admitted. But I can see you're wearing a wedding ring. And I can see that whoever Patricia was, losing her broke something inside you. The silence that followed was heavy. Passengers held their breath. The plane shuddered with turbulence, but no one moved. Gregory began to speak. His wife Patricia had been a veteran, a proud woman who served her country. She developed cancer 3 years ago. The VA hospital delayed her treatment for months, lost paperwork, transferred her between departments, made her wait and wait until the cancer spread beyond saving. He held her hand as she died, powerless, enraged, broken. He promised her he would make someone pay. He spent 2 years planning this moment. The government building he wanted to strike was a VA administrative center. He saw himself as a martyr, not a murderer. Alicia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she spoke. I know what it means to lose someone you love. My mother died while I was deployed overseas. I couldn't be there. I couldn't hold her hand. I carry that guilt every single day. Gregory stared at her, his anger wavering. I also know what it means to be failed by systems that were supposed to protect you, Alicia continued. I've been overlooked, dismissed, humiliated. This very morning, a man publicly mocked me in front of dozens of strangers because he couldn't believe a black woman could hold rank in the Navy. She took a small step closer. But there are 246 other people on this plane, Gregory. Children, grandparents, a young couple on their honeymoon, a grandfather flying to meet his first grandchild. None of them hurt Patricia. None of them failed her. Tears streamed down Gregory's face. His hand trembled. If you do this, Alicia said gently, Patricia's name becomes attached to murder. Is that her legacy? Is that how you want the world to remember her? Gregory's voice was barely a whisper. I just wanted someone to pay. I know, Alicia replied. But this isn't payment. This is just more pain. The moment stretched endlessly. The plane shook again. A child whimpered somewhere in the back. Gregory looked at the trigger in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. Then his fingers opened. The trigger fell to the floor with a soft clatter. Gregory collapsed into the nearest seat, sobbing. Passengers nearby moved quickly, securing the device under Alicia's guidance while others gently restrained Gregory. No violence. Just firm, careful hands. The cabin breathed. Passengers wept with relief, embraced strangers, whispered prayers of thanks. But there was no time for celebration. Marcus's voice crackled over the intercom from the cockpit. "Admiral, we need you. The systems are failing faster." Alicia sprinted back toward the front of the plane. She burst into the cockpit to find chaos. Captain Shaw was slumped in his seat, unconscious, his face gray and sweating. Denise was shouting into the radio while Marcus stared helpless at blinking warning lights. "Heart attack," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "He just collapsed." Alicia looked at the controls, at the endless array of switches and screens and gauges. She had commanded Navy vessels through storms that would sink lesser ships. She had trained in aviation operations, understood aerodynamics, knew crisis management better than most people knew their own names. But she had never flown a commercial aircraft. She slid into the captain's seat anyway. There was no other choice. Outside the cockpit windows, storm clouds gathered over Pennsylvania. Lightning flashed in the distance. The plane shuddered with turbulence that grew stronger by the minute. Alicia gripped the controls and spoke one silent prayer. "Mama, if you're watching, I need you now." The instrument panel stretched before Alicia like a foreign language written in lights and numbers. She forced herself to breathe, to focus, to remember every piece of aviation training she had absorbed over 3 decades. "Ethan," she commanded, her voice sharp, "walk me through every system you sabotaged. Now." Ethan responded immediately, his guilt transforming into desperate cooperation. He pointed to screens, explained which circuits he had damaged, which redundancies he had disabled. Some damage was reversible. Some was not. Alicia absorbed the information rapidly, prioritizing. Hydraulics were partially functional. Navigation was compromised but workable. Fuel readings were unreliable, but she could estimate based on time and distance. The landing gear mechanism was damaged, uncertain whether it would deploy properly. She keyed the radio. "Air traffic control. This is Flight 923. Passenger Alicia Freeman, United States Navy Admiral, now in command. Captain incapacitated. Co-pilot compromised. Requesting emergency guidance for approach to Philadelphia International." The response came quickly, a veteran controller's voice cutting through static. "Flight 923. We copy. Admiral Freeman, we are patching in a commercial pilot to guide you through landing procedures. Emergency crews are being mobilized. What is your current status?" Alicia reported everything. Altitude, heading, system failures, passenger count, injured crew. The controller listened without interruption, then connected her to a retired pilot named Thomas who had logged over 20,000 flight hours. Thomas's voice was calm, reassuring. "Admiral, you've got this. Just listen to my voice and follow each step." Together, they began the process of stabilizing the aircraft. Ethan worked beside her, reversing what sabotage he could, rerouting power to critical systems. Marcus continued calling out gauge readings with steady determination. Denise relayed every instruction from air traffic control with precision. They were a team. Strangers bound together by crisis, each playing their role. But the storm would not cooperate. Weather radar showed a massive system directly over Philadelphia, exactly where they needed to land. Rain hammered the windshield, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Lightning illuminated the clouds in brilliant, terrifying flashes. Turbulence slammed the aircraft repeatedly, throwing loose objects through the cabin. Air traffic control recommended diverting to another airport. Alicia checked the fuel estimates. There was not enough. Philadelphia or nothing. "Negative on diversion," she responded. "We're going in." Thomas's voice returned. "Understood, Admiral. Let's bring them home." The descent began. Alicia fought the controls as crosswinds battered the plane. She made constant micro-adjustments, relying on instinct as much as instruction. Behind her, she could hear passengers crying, praying, holding each other. Marcus began reciting the Lord's Prayer. Other voices joined him, a chorus of faith rising above the storm. At 3,000 feet, Alicia attempted to deploy the landing gear. The mechanism groaned, resisted, then partially engaged. 2 wheels locked into position. The third refused. "We're going in with partial gear," Ethan reported, his voice grim. "Impact is going to be rough." Alicia keyed the cabin intercom. "This is your captain speaking. Brace for impact. Heads down. Stay down." Lisa's voice followed immediately, guiding passengers through emergency positions. The cabin fell into tense silence broken only by muffled sobs and whispered prayers. The runway lights appeared through the rain like distant stars. Alicia lined up the approach, adjusting for the crosswind that threatened to push them off course. Thomas talked her through each second, his voice a lifeline. 500 feet, 300 feet, 100 feet. The plane touched down hard on two wheels. The impact jolted through the entire aircraft. Passengers screamed. Metal groaned. The damaged third gear collapsed on contact, and the plane tilted violently to one side. Sparks flew as the wings scraped the runway. Alicia fought the controls with everything she had, steering away from the edge, away from disaster. The plane slid sideways, friction screaming against asphalt, emergency foam spraying from trucks racing alongside. Seconds felt like hours. The world became noise and motion and desperate prayer. Then, finally, mercifully, the plane stopped. Silence. 3 heartbeats of absolute silence. Then eruption. Cheers. Sobs. Screaming relief. Passengers embraced strangers like family. Emergency slides deployed. Crew guided evacuation with shaking hands and tearful voices. Outside, rescue teams swarmed the aircraft. Paramedics rushed to assist passengers. Fire crews doused the smoking wing. Media helicopters circled overhead, cameras capturing the miracle on runway 27R. Marcus stumbled down the emergency slide and fell to his knees on the wet tarmac, kissing the ground. Denise clutched her phone, already calling her family. James and Tanya held each other, crying and laughing simultaneously. Lisa helped elderly passengers to safety, her earlier guilt transformed into purpose. Every single passenger survived. 247 souls delivered from certain death. In the cockpit, Alicia remained seated. Her hands still gripped the controls. Her body trembled with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. She stared through the rain-streaked windshield at the emergency lights flashing red and blue across the tarmac. Ethan sat beside her, silent. Finally, he spoke. "You saved us. You saved all of us." Alicia did not respond. She could not find words. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest, making breathing difficult. A paramedic appeared at the cockpit door. "We need to check you out. Can you walk?" Alicia nodded slowly. She released the controls, finger by finger, as if letting go of something sacred. She stood on unsteady legs and followed the paramedic toward the exit. As she stepped onto the emergency slide, she heard passengers calling her name. Hands reached toward her, voices offering thanks, blessings, prayers. Camera flashes exploded from beyond the security perimeter. Reporters shouted questions she could not process. She had saved them, all of them. But standing there in the rain, surrounded by strangers who now knew her name, Alicia Freeman felt more alone than ever. The morning had begun with public humiliation. It was ending with something she never sought and did not want, fame. But whether she wanted it or not, the world was watching now, and they would never see her the same way again. The hours following the landing blurred into chaos. Passengers were wrapped in emergency blankets and guided toward waiting buses. Families arrived in waves, tears and embraces everywhere. Television crews lined perimeter, their cameras hungry for the story that was already breaking across every network. Mysterious passenger saves doomed flight. Black Admiral becomes unlikely hero. Miracle landing at Philadelphia International. The headlines multiplied by the minute. Denise's phone recording spread across social media within hours. Passengers posted their own videos, their own testimonies, their own tearful accounts of the woman who walked calmly toward a man with a bomb and talked him into surrender. The woman who took the controls of a crippled aircraft and landed it through a storm. The name Alicia Freeman trended worldwide before sunset. But Alicia herself had disappeared. While reporters interviewed passengers and experts analyzed the landing footage, she slipped away to a quiet corner of the terminal. A paramedic checked her vitals and recommended hospital observation. She declined. "Check the others first. I'm fine." She was not fine, but she had spent 30 years pretending to be fine. One more night would not break her. Marcus found her first. The retired postal worker approached slowly, his eyes red from crying. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood before her, then wrapped his arms around her in a firm embrace. "I served 28 years delivering mail," he said quietly. "Thought I'd seen everything this world had to offer. But you, Admiral, you showed me something today I'll carry for the rest of my life." Others followed. Denise, the honeymoon couple, passengers whose names she never learned but whose faces she would never forget. Each offered thanks. Each asked her name as if memorizing something holy. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Richard Thompson watched the news coverage with growing horror. The woman on every screen was the same woman he had publicly humiliated that morning. His phone erupted with calls from airline executives. Passengers from Gate B34 came forward with their own recordings of his behavior. Former employees shared their own stories of his discrimination. Within 48 hours, Richard Thompson was terminated. Multiple lawsuits followed. His name became synonymous with the casual racism that black professionals endured daily. His downfall was swift, complete, and very public. Ethan Riley was taken into federal custody at the airport. He cooperated fully, providing information that led to the rescue of his daughter and the arrest of the criminal organization that had threatened his family. His fate remained uncertain, caught between the crimes he committed and the lives he helped save. Justice and mercy wrestled for dominance in his case. Gregory Hines was placed under psychiatric evaluation. His wife's story gained media attention, prompting an investigation into the VA hospital's negligence. His actions were criminal, but the system that broke him faced new scrutiny. Before being transferred to a facility, Alicia visited him briefly. "Get the help you need," she told him. "Patricia deserves that." The airline offered Alicia lifetime first-class travel. She declined. Instead, she requested mandatory bias training for all staff and a commitment to hiring black leadership at executive levels. The airline agreed publicly, knowing the world was watching. Alicia's estranged daughter Maya had seen everything on television. She called 17 times before Alicia finally answered. Their conversation lasted 3 hours, tears flowing on both ends. Decades of distance began closing in a single night. "I never understood why you were gone so much," Maya admitted. "Now I think I do." Alicia attended her Pentagon commendation ceremony as originally scheduled, but now the room overflowed with press and dignitaries. She received the Distinguished Service Medal to thunderous applause. She accepted it in honor of her mother, the woman who taught her that silence was sometimes survival, but courage was knowing when to speak. That night, alone in her hotel room, Alicia held her mother's gold cross necklace against her heart. "I hope you're proud, Mama," she whispered. "I finally found my voice." She never sought fame. She never wanted the spotlight. But her story spread anyway, carried by those she saved, those she inspired, those who saw themselves in her struggle. Have you ever faced public humiliation and transformed it into strength? Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Your experiences deserve to be heard. If stories like Commander Freeman's inspire you, if you believe in courage, resilience, and the power of untold truths, then subscribe to Unheard Black Voices and join this family. New stories of triumph over injustice arrive every week. Do not miss a single moment of courage. Remember this, the world may try to silence you, but your story, your voice, can never truly be unheard. This is Unheard Black Voices, and we are just getting started.